How's it going, everybody? This is the Nitty Gritty. My name is Chad. With me, as usual, is Leonard, and this is a show about wrestling. And we are going to be revisiting our Spotlight series here this week, where we take somebody that was in the business for a while, but maybe had somewhat of an under the radar career, and we're going to talk about that person. And in this case, we are going to be talking about Luke Joseph Joe Mark Scarpa Jr. What a long name that is. But he is better known from wrestling fans as who, Leonard?
As Mark Young and a few other names too. He also wrestled as Private Mark Pyle, Vince Young, Todd Overbow, and Mark Scarpa.
Over bow or over bow? In my head I thought it was over bow, but if it was pronounced over bow by the announcers, I
I
suppose.
know, you know what? I didn't watch any of those matches, so I'm not sure how they pronounced it. I
Got
went with Bow, but it could be Bow. It was a drop in the bucket, which we'll see to
yeah.
his career. But so I'm going to lead here a little bit tonight. So we're going to give a kind of an overview of his early years, of his career. We're going to talk about some matches and then give our final thoughts. And this one was suggested by a good friend of the show, Ronnie. So thank you for this suggestion. So as you mentioned, his full name, he was born April 23rd, 1967, died February 25th, 2016, at just the age of 48 of unknown causes. I'm getting most of this from Wikipedia to mention.
Right.
And he was the adopted son of Chief Jay Strongbow, who was a wrestler and later road agent for the World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, then WWF. Chad, before we get going more on this, do you know anything? Do you have any memories of Jay Strongbow?
Just memories from, like, my brother was a little bit older than me, and my dad, like, those, they mentioned him to me, but i I always heard of him, and I really didn't see any footage of him until some of the DVDs slash documentaries started to come out from WWEF.
Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously, as podcasts became more popular, I knew he was, a big agent in the back for a while. But yeah, I mean, other than just by reputation, I to date, even, I don't know that I've really watched a full Chief Jay Strongbow match, but I certainly know of his popularity. So
Maybe we need to add him to like our random match reviews, do a random Jay Strongbow match, because I don't think I've ever watched anything of his either. I always equated him to like the WWS version of Wahoo McDaniel. Like everybody had to have a Native American gimmick, and he was
right,
just the dude that was up there.
right.
So maybe we need to visit him some. So Young was trained by Stu Hart up in Calgary, and he made his debut for Stampede Wrestling in 1986. Now we're going to talk a little bit about Mark's style, but based on his style, it's a high-flying style, it's an athletic style. Do you believe that he was trained by Stu Hart?
So yeah, like the thing you mentioned, like the high flying style, certainly he has those moves in his repertoire, but he also relies very heavily on, like, the, I'm not a wrestler, so this might be me talking out of turn, but like wrestling 101 style moves. Uh,
Yeah.
so, like, wrist locks and sleeper holds and, arm drags and suplex, like, just very basic, like,
Armbar.
season one tough enough stuff. Like,
Yeah.
so it's tough for me to see that he was trained by Stu Hart. And it's funny, in one of the matches I watched, like, they don't mention who he is related to, but they say, oh, Lord Alfred Hayes, I believe, was like, oh, this person was trained by Chief Jay Strongbow. And like, and then because I had already seen the Stu Hart thing, and in my head I was like, why would they? I don't know. I know why they said it, but like,
Mhm.
why wouldn't you mention Stu Hart as well? I don't know.
And
It's tough to
and
see.
there was another match. I think it was Sean Mooney said something about, oh, I think he's got some Native American blood, or he probably said Indian blood
I remember
in
that as
him.
well, and I remember thinking that was such an odd comment. Like, it's like I knew what they were referencing, but I was trying to, we'll
It
get
was
to
a lot of insider baseball stuff. One of the
yeah,
matches that we watched, and again, we're going to get to the matches, was Shane McMahon was the referee.
yeah, which
And
is how you find it on YouTube, which I think is funny. It's
yeah, and like I want, and again, they're talking, and I believe this is Mooney and Hayes, and they're like, oh, I wonder if his dad's proud of him or whatever. And it was like all these
yeah,
allusions to the referee's dad.
yeah, yeah,
So I think there was a lot of inside baseball. And again, this was like International Challenge, or it was like one of the D shows for them. So they could probably say whatever they wanted
right,
on those programs.
yeah,
Um, but to carry on here, so he worked in Calgary in WWE about the same time because they were trading a lot of talent. He made his debut for WWE in November of 1986 against Steve Lombardi, and worked off and on for them through about 1989, mostly doing house show matches. In April of '88, Young joined Continental Championship Wrestling, where he was forced to join drill instructor Bob Carter's honor guard after losing a match to Tony Anthony, better known as the Dirty White Boy. And that's when he took on the Private Mark Pyle name, which I'm guessing was a playoff of Gomer Pyle from the TV show starring Jim Nabors. A while back, we watched an episode of Continental, and I believe Young was on it as Pyle. And I didn't specifically go and try to find any Pyle matches. But I do believe we did run across him in that character. The next part of Young's career is the most significant. He goes back, well, I'm jumping ahead. He debuts for WCW first in February 18th of 1989 on WCW Saturday Night against Trent Knight. And he's using the name Vince Young at this point. And he seems to be getting a bit of a push here, but he abruptly leaves them on March 23rd after a match with Kendall Windham to return to WWE on a full-time basis. His character there would be pretty much what he was doing in WCW. Two main points. He breakdances before and after matches, which is pretty goofy.
yep,
And the other is that he has these tights that are red, white, and blue. They're patriotic, and they have stars on the legs. And that's what I remembered. After I started watching some matches, I was like, oh, I remember those tights. I remember this guy now, because I didn't initially remember the name when Ronnie gave this to us. So, Chad, did you have any memories before we started to look up stuff for this episode of Mark Young? Did you know who he was before we did this?
no, not at all. And I had zero recollection of this individual, and honestly, when I saw the name, and when we talked about doing this, the first thought in my head was, oh man, this guy's matches are going to be tough to find. He has such a generic name, Mark Young. Like, they weren't hard to find ultimately,
No.
but yeah, no, I have zero recollection.
Okay. Like I said, the tights are cooked it for me. But during this period with WWE, he got what I would call probably a minimal push. He had some very competitive matches and won matches over guys like on his level, like the Brooklyn Brawler and Barry Horowitz. He worked a house show program. His first kind of feud, as it were, with the company was against Boris Zukov, of all people. Maybe it was because he was the Russian and Mark had those pants. I don't know.
Well,
Young lost.
just to interrupt here, like you mentioned the
Yeah.
tights, like and the tights were a note of mine simply because I feel like whenever a talent gets, stuck with any sort of like the red, white, and blue gimmick, it's normally not a good sign of what they think that person can offer. I mean, there are obviously there's exceptions, in the history of wrestling, but ultimately, if like, okay, look at he's got the red, white, and blue tights on, then they're just kind of relying on the fact that he's like patriotic to get the crowd behind him.
Right.
And, if that's what you have to go to immediately, like, then it's not a good sign. And I tried to look up promos by this guy. I couldn't find any.
Yeah, I couldn't find any. I couldn't find any either. But Yeah, that I would agree with you there. So he had a house show program with Boris Zukov. He then did a lot of stuff with Barry Horowitz, and then had a house show program with Earthquake, getting squashed all around the world by him. His first televised win, which we're going to talk about, was December 4th on Primetime Wrestling against Horowitz. And he left WWE in September of 1990 after a match with Ronnie Garvin and a brief stint in that summer in All Japan. So he was briefly over in All Japan in the summer of 90. He then floated around a good bit before returning to the WWE in January of 92. This is where he's using the Todd Overbow or Overbow name. And I didn't really find anything on that, like why did they just not want people to remember who he was
Well,
and do something
he had a
else? I don't
mullet
know.
by that time, like a full on mullet by that time.
Which was almost like a mask, so people wouldn't know who he was.
Well, it's like, it's weird because like when he debuts, like he has the short haircut, and
Mm-hmm.
then you know at that time the mullet was in style, and then in the early '90s, '92, when he goes back to be Todd Overbow, like he has the mullet, which at that point was fading out of style. Like so, like if he had the short haircut, then I don't maybe it wouldn't have helped him at all. Maybe it couldn't have hurt.
Yeah.
But I actually did look up Todd Overbow matches. We'll get to that later, though.
Oh, okay, I did not watch any, so I did not think to even look for that. So you'll have to talk about some of those in a little bit. So anywhere during this period, he didn't appear on TV much. He had losses to Papa Shango and Roddy Piper when he was IC champ, so that was a rare period. And he wound up leaving at the end of February and wound up working for Global Wrestling Federation with the Overbow name. And he won against Steve Dane on March 20th on their TV, but didn't win anything after that. Summer, again, as Vince Young, he came back to WCW, and his only televised match was on the August 22nd edition of Worldwide, where he and Al Jackson lost to the oddball tag team of Dan Spivey and the Barbarian, who I am going to call the Towers of Pain.
I like it.
Yes. So Young's last recorded match was on May 8th of 1993. So he was only active between 86 and 93. This was for Mid-Eastern Wrestling Federation, teaming with Trent Young in a losing effort to Joe Thunder and Johnny Blaze. And not a lot, like I said, most of this came from Wikipedia. I tried to look up some other resources. Didn't seem to be a lot of out there about him. And again, low level guy, even though he was the adopted son of a major name in Jay Strongbow. So not a lot out there. So before we go to the matches, Chad, anything else you want to say or discuss on Young and his career overview here?
Well, basically just a precursor to the matches, which is I actively tried to look up some of the All Japan stuff, where it looked like he was mostly in a tag team match with various people, Terry Gordy, Abdullah the Butcher, and a name that stood out to me, Leonard, and I had to click on it because initially I did a double take and I was like, and it says Dusty Rhodes Jr., which maybe you knew this. I never knew that Dustin Rhodes went by that moniker. Like I did not realize. Maybe he didn't. I don't know, but it's written in Wikipedia, Dusty Rhodes Jr.
Maybe he did in Japan.
There you go. So one of the reasons why I wanted to find Mark Young's work in Japan was simply because not just because it's Japan, because in a lot of times, like a wrestler has room to stretch and really show what they can do more so in Japan than they might under Vince McMahon's watch or even WCW's watch. So I was curious to see what he did there, but I couldn't find any of those matches, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, you know, his career, and I might close with similar comments. I feel like a number of things worked against him in his career. You could, if you put together like a list, there's a lot of them, and it's easy to say, well, he was just a jobber. I feel like there's a few reasons why that was the case,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll get there as we do our closing
Sure.
arguments. So.
So as far as matches on YouTube, I pretty much looked up Mark Young and Vince Young stuff, and there's a lot of squashes that you can find. There's one joint in progress against Lanny Poffo that looks like pretty good match, and Lanny I think matches up well with him on paper.
Yeah, I agree.
Against Earthquake, against Greg Valentine. Mark Young and Bill Woods against the Brainbusters. One of him in WCW tagging with Eddie Gilbert, which seems kind of random, against the Cruel Connection. And before we go on, we talk about some of the significant matches. Of these jobber matches, I would say it's obvious that Young didn't have his heart into any of these squashes. He's very lifeless here. He doesn't do much at all in these matches when you compare him to some of the others we're going to talk about. You know, a lot of the jobbers, you look at guys like Barry Horowitz and Brooklyn Brawler, who we mentioned. You look at Jobber to the Stars, like a Coco Beware. They did their best
Right.
to get the other guy over. He didn't seem to do that. So, you know, is that as far as his jobber matches go? Is that kind of your thoughts as well? He's not a guy who wanted to be in that position.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, early on in his career, you can see he has a little bit more pizzazz. He's, more energetic. I mean, I think Lord Alfred Hayes mentioned in one of them that he was in his teens. I mean, I don't know how old he was when he first joined, but like, I mean, if he was in his teens, then, obviously he had that youthful energy and like at the beginning, but, yeah, toward especially like, so the Todd Overbo match that I watched was against Roddy Piper, and it was right before their his big match with Bret Hart for
Yeah.
the IC strap. And I don't know if I've ever seen a Rowdy Piper squash match before, but that's what this was. And, Piper finishes it with the sleeper hold, which oddly enough was a hold that Mark Young used to win a match. Um, and yeah, I mean, at that point, he had been through the ringer, right? And 92 is when he faced Piper and he had the run against Papa Shango. Um, by that point, he had been in a few companies and I think realized that his career wasn't going to be going anywhere other than being an enhancement talent. So yeah, I agree. You could see that his heart really wasn't in it at that point. I would say that the Brawler match and the Barry Horowitz match are probably the best examples of
Mm-hmm.
of his talent. And oh yeah, the Trent Young, not Trent Young. What is that his name?
Trent Knight.
Trent Knight.
I believe there might be a Trent Young because I kept calling him Trent Young in my head. So there might be a Trent Young somewhere out there. And before you go too far, if his birthday is correct as being April of 67, he would have been 19 when he joined WWF.
So there you go. They were correct in saying that. And I would say the Trent Knight match would probably be the best one I saw. If I had to rank them. And yeah, I mean, his finishing move was like a hop off of the second rope into a sunset flip. At least that's the one I use the most.
Yeah, I called it a turnaround sunset flip.
There
A
you go.
turnaround top rope sunset
Yeah.
flip in my notes. He shows a lot more energy in the pretty good bouts, like we mentioned. My favorite was the second one, the longer one against Barry Horowitz. The one against Trent Knight felt a little out of step, and I think it's because maybe Young had to do more in that match, where against Barry Horowitz and Steve Lombardi, those guys are walking him through it.
True.
The prime time match I thought was really, really good because it told a story. Horowitz is having a hard time putting Mark Young away. He's trying all these different things. He's getting really frustrated. And Young is just keeping up with Horowitz. Like he's just doing enough to keep up with him, but he's showing tenacity, he's showing intensity, and that is just really throwing Barry off. So the fact that match told a story, I like that one probably the best of all the ones I watched. One thing that you mentioned earlier that you definitely see in these matches, and this was actually a problem in the first Horowitz match, even though it was shorter, is that Young goes to an armbar just to go to an armbar.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't know what else to do, so he does an armbar until they get to the next sequence, or Barry can catch a breath and say, okay, here's what we're doing next, that
Right.
type of thing. So that, and you do mention his moveset is basic, but I think it's very crisp. I think his hip tosses, his drop kicks, all those moves, he, especially in the matches where he's winning, there's a snap to him.
Yeah.
So so I think that is part of, you know, the good stuff. And it's very, and we can segue to final. Well, is there any other matches you want to talk about before we go on to final thoughts? Again, those, I think the key matches, if people listening, if you want to check out anything of Mark Young, definitely check out the Trent Knight match, his debut in WCW. Check out the two Barry Horowitz matches, the one from Primetime especially, and the one against the Brooklyn Brawler. Anything else match wise you want to mention here?
No, I watched pretty much the same ones that you did. And yeah, I mean, I would agree that the moves that he does pretty well. It's just, unfortunately for him, like this was at a time when there were some guys that did some high flying stuff, but it wasn't really what WWF or even WCW really like strove to highlight. Like this was the time when it was just giants, these, chiseled out of stone guys or these larger than life personality. Like so like you had some of these guys that could do fast stuff, but like he did some things, but like, then like you said, like he just kind of went to like the basics when he didn't have anything else to do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, match wise, it would have been cool to see a match or two where it lasted longer than 5 minutes.
Yeah. And again, we couldn't find any promos, and he probably didn't cut any. If he did, they were like for local TV or
Right.
local house shows. But he doesn't have a charisma that oozes through the screen. He doesn't have a presence. He's got a pretty good body. He looks, pretty good looking guy. Again, what he does do, he does pretty well. But he's, the generic creator wrestler you start with in a video game,
Right.
and then you
And,
try to get his stats up and you earn more clothes and gimmick elements for him as you go, as you build this guy up. That's really what he feels like. And the breakdance gimmick, I
oh
mean,
yeah.
that was, he's doing that in 89, 90, 91. And again, breakdancing was big 80, 83, 84, 85. So like you said,
Somebody told him to do that right before he came out of the curtain the first time. Like, what should I do? Dance. Like, like,
yeah,
and the poor guy like gets stuck with the red, white, and blue tights, and then he's told to break dance, and like they just didn't have anything for him. And
no.
because why didn't they have anything for him? Well, this kind of bleeds into my final thoughts, which is I think there were a number of things that didn't help his case. One being Leonard mentioned it. His looks are very cookie cutter. Like he's the okay looking guy. He has an okay looking body, but there were dozens of guys that had an okay looking body and were okay in the ring. You know, they even mentioned in the Wikipedia article Tim Horner, Paul Roma, but Paul Roma was a guy who could be a dick. So like, so he was a little bit more popular than somebody like Mark Young.
Mhm.
It's everything is very basic and like there's not really anything of him to stand out except that he's the adopted son of Chief Jay Strongbow, and that doesn't help him either. And I'm sure that that was really tough growing up, you know, under like, the tutelage and, in the family of somebody who's already crafted a legendary career, and maybe felt like he had to go and do this. And maybe at a time he wanted to do it. But, so many cases in wrestling, we see the second generation, third generation stars that try to follow in the parents' footsteps, and it just doesn't work out because, there's so much pressure on them to deliver like their parents did. And even though maybe most people didn't know who he was related to, the people in the back certainly did.
Yeah.
And, those to me are the two major factors that probably didn't help his career.
Another thing, I went looking for some podcasts to see if anybody talked about him, and I couldn't find any of that either. So I would guess he wasn't that memorable to anybody
The next
that
time
he
anyone
worked with.
asks Bruce Pritchard anything, you got to write
Yeah,
it.
your memories of Mark Young. Yeah, that's a good idea. Some of the other guys do those ask me anything ones. We'll have to see if we can't write Mark Young in. What do you remember of Mark Young?
Yeah.
Send that one into Jim Cornette. Although I don't think Jim Cornette was around Young.
Yeah, I suppose the main person would be
Yeah, Pritchard would have
like
been there.
because Eric Bischoff probably wouldn't know who he was because if you can get Eric Bischoff to talk about anything other than AEW, you've accomplished a great goal these days. But who else is there? I mean, like Jake Roberts at one point had a podcast. He might remember something.
Yeah, I'd have to look at who does. Dutch Mantel had one at one point, and he remember seems to have a story about everybody.
Yeah,
So
he's another good one who I feel like some of the guys out there that have just met and done everything, those are the
mhm.
more interesting podcasts to me.
Yeah. Now, like Nash has one, but Nash was in after him. So yeah, it'd be interesting to throw a question at any of these guys that would have been around, and it'd probably be like Mark Young. Good Lord, why are you asking me about Mark Young?
And you know what?
Uh,
In all honesty, the answer is probably, they'd probably be like, well, he was a good guy. He just, was a jobber, and
right, Bruce will say, "Hey, decent enough guy." Like back in the locker room. He was Jay Strongbow's kid, so he got a little push there, but he just didn't have it. He didn't have the it factor. I think
right.
that's what Bruce would say.
We've literally
Because
answered the question for Bruce.
yes, I did. Because here's what I was thinking. With everything that we've talked about, let's say he got a gimmick, and I don't know what gimmick you would give him. At best, I think his highest ceiling would have been like a decent mid carder.
Right,
Like you mentioned, like Paul Roma, like someone in WCW at the TV title level.
right.
Like that's about as far as I think his ceiling was.
Yeah,
And that was because one, the basic move set, two, the lack of charisma just as a presence that he showed, and three, in any of the matches that we watched, including the ones where he won, he didn't get much of a pop. There was very little crowd reaction. He
right.
wasn't engaging with the crowd very much at all. Now, did I enjoy what we watched? Like I said, I really enjoyed the Horowitz matches. So he wasn't, and I keep coming back to Tom McGee, who we did the spotlight on. That again, this was another guy who was very athletic. He did like a turnaround thing off the top rope and all this too. Much more athletic, much bigger build than Mark Young.
Yeah,
But I keep coming back to a guy that didn't get as far as I think was initially planned to get, and it's kind of hard to put your finger on one certain thing because there's so much
right,
that just didn't work out for him.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. And maybe, they took a look at his ring work and thought, he's a little rough around the edges, and maybe that didn't improve enough for them to be like, we should give him some promo time. Who knows?
Yeah.
It could
Yeah.
be.
And again, giving him matches and wins against like Lombardi and Horowitz, I mean, that says that yeah, we want to take a look at you. That is at least we want to look at you level, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. So yeah, I mean, and his cause of death is unknown. He obviously died, way too soon. I can't even speculate because I tried to look this up before we
Yeah,
went.
me too.
I tried to find what I could find, and there's just very little. There's some Facebook groups that mention him. Like when he died, rest in peace, all that kind of stuff. Nobody I saw mentions anything. So, if you out there know anything about his passing, let us know. I'd be curious to find out what happened there. But yeah, I
Yeah, and
mean,
not a lot of personal information either. Like, what did he do after he retired? You know, what was he like outside the ring? He's just one of those guys that just we know a very basic thumbnail sketch of
yeah,
from basically just his time on TV and being able to kind of map that timeline.
yeah. I'm not gonna get out of my head though. Like the creator wrestler, like he, like that is the guy that you would start with. Like it
Yeah,
really is.
yeah, like the look, the hair, the
Yeah,
pants.
the pants. That's what they would give you with. Oh, start with patriotic pants.
You know, the patriotic fans, and it'd be like you would have like three gimmicks to choose from. One would be like breakdancer.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm actually curious. Like, if I were in a room with Bruce Pritchard and I asked him about Mark Young, I'd probably follow up with like, you didn't even think about trying, Jay Strongbow Jr. Like, it wouldn't that have been like the last resort gimmick? Like, maybe he wasn't around long enough for them to think about that. Who knows? Um,
Yeah, I don't know. He doesn't look very Native American, but
well,
they could say he's the adopted son of,
that's true.
and he took the name of. You know,
He embraced the
I
heritage, Leonard. Come on.
yes, yeah, right, right, right. Well, I believe Jay Strongbow. I didn't look this up, but I believe he was Italian,
Yes.
which which a lot of the Native American guys were Italians.
Yeah. Yep, yep, very, very true. And I absolutely will, after this, look up some of Chief Jay Strongbow's best matches because I'm sure there's some out there that
Yeah, we'll do a. You know what? Let's do a Jay Strongbow match for random match reviews coming up.
absolutely.
See
All
what the
right,
best one we can find is.
all right. Well, if you have any memories of Mark Young, let us know. And if you've seen some of these matches or plan to, let us know. And check out our other episodes segment surgery, random match reviews, stupid questions, and what's that card. We're also available wherever you listen to podcasts. For Leonard, my name is Chad, and we will see you next time.